Hey.
All right. Okay. All right, so you'll be Michael me again. I'm sorry we got a little late start, but I really will try not to keep you any later than usual. Okay, so I usually try to talk about a mitzvah that's related to the parsha. Didn't have that much time today, so we're not going to do that. So we're going to do something that's a little bit more related to, I guess, Torah in general. It's still a little bit shuastic, I guess we can say. So I think Torah is always an appropriate theme anyway. So we'll do about that. So we'll take a particular prat. It's part of one of the 613. We'll take a particular prat of the mitzvah, and we'll see where that takes us. Okay, so it's like this. It says in Parsha Shoftim. There's a number of places in Chumash, Parsha Shoftim is one of them, where the Torah gives us a lot of mitzvahs regarding procedure, like Beis Din, and Dayanim and Sanhedrin and things like that. Like Sikach Sheichad, not to take Sheichad, to be Achar Mahatas, different halachas, different mitzvahs that we have regarding how Sanhedrin should function, how the Dini Torah should function. So one of the psukim that we have, which is very difficult to even the simple taich of the pasuk and to know what it means in halacha, it's very difficult. The pasuk says, "Leisana al riv lintais." Now, the literal translation of the words seem to be very difficult. Leisana al riv lintais means don't respond to an argument to go one way. That's the opposite of what Beis Din does. The whole job of Beis Din is an argument comes to them, and they respond to the argument to go one way. That was loisana al riv lintais. So it's like a very difficult pasuk how to read. So that's what we're going to see. We're going to see tonight a certain interpretation of Chazal. There's different places in Chazal where they interpret this pasuk differently, but one interpretation of Chazal in one particular place, and we'll see where that takes us. Okay. So in Marmukah number 1, this is a Mishnah / Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Lamed Beis Amud Aleph. Okay. So the Mishnah is talking about the procedural side of Dinei Torah of Beis Dins. So you have Shiloh comes to the Sanhedrin, to the Beis Din, whoever it is, whether it's sometimes, if they get witnesses testify, whatever, the evidence is laid out, whatever it is, and the Dayanim go back and forth, Masamatim, they try to be mafalpal, go back and forth what the law should be, and then it's the point of where now every Dayan has to say his opinion. And then we know, obviously, the opinions are all laid out. Then you go based on the majority, whatever the situation is. So the Mishnah is talking about how was there a setup? What was the setup to allow each Dayan to present his conclusion? So the Mishnah says like this in Sanhedrin Lamed Beis Amud Aleph: Dine Maminis, when it comes to monetary cases, or Hatmeis or Taharis, or Shilas about Tum and Tahara. In other words, anything that's not capital punishment, anything that's not Dine Nefashis, Maschil min Hagadol. Then when you have Dayanim, each one is saying their opinion, you begin with the greatest of the Dayan, the Av, the Nasi of the Sanhedrin, or the Av of the Sanhedrin, whatever the title is, from the greatest to the smallest. That's the procedure. The Nefashis, when it comes to capital cases, Maschil min Hatzad. Then you start from the side. In other words, that's what the Mishnah means. You start from the opposite, from the smallest Dayan. Then you go up to the greatest. That's what the Mishnah says. Okay, now the Mishnah doesn't explain where this is coming from. Comes the Gemara, Minan and Mili, asks the Gemara, how do I know this? That again, by monetary cases, Tum and Tahara, Isser V'Heter, and so on, you start from the Gadol and you work your way down. Versus the Nefashis, you start from the smallest and you work your way up. Where's this coming from? So Amar Rav Acha bar Papa, so Rav Acha bar Papa said, Amar Kra, because it says in Pasuk, Leisana al Riv, this Pasuk that we're talking about, Leisana al Riv, again, lintais, simply don't respond to an argument to go one way. V'darshinan, says the Gemara, we darshan, Leisana al Rav. Don't respond, don't disagree with the Rav, with the head of the Beis Din. Now, the context of that pasuk is talking about the nefashis. It's talking about capital punishment. That's the context of the pasuk. So says the Gemara, the pasuk is trying to say that when it comes to capital punishment, lo yisan al rav. Don't argue with the head dayan. And because you can't argue with the head dayan, that's the explanation of why by din nefashis you start from the bottom, from the smallest, and you work your way up. What does that mean? How do we see this? So if you take a look at Marmukah number 2, the Nemukah Yosef, just to explain this simple pshat in the Gemara, Then Milky Yosef says, Elohachi Kamar. So the Milky Yosef asks the obvious question. The pasuk is saying that you can't disagree with the head dayan. Of course, if you have a different opinion, if you're a dayan on the case, and the gadol of the dayanim goes one way, if you feel differently, of course you can't just be. There's other psukim that says you can't be a little lemela. You have to say your opinion. So what does it mean? Don't argue with the dayan, with the head one. Elachi kamar kra. What the pasuk therefore is trying to say is it's a pasuk that's it's trying to tell us procedural halachas. Sheish lasis be'inyan shleitztarchu la'anais arav, that the way the procedural situation should be when it comes to din nefashos is in such a way that you won't have to come to directly disagree with the head dayan. In other words, Kloimer, in other words, start from the smallest and work your way up to the greatest. In other words, the pasuk is trying to tell us, I want the situation, says the pasuk, to be in such a way where you're not directly disagreeing with the head dayan. You should disagree if you feel so, but procedurally make it work in such a way where you're not openly, straight up disagreeing with the head dayan. How so? So that's the way to do it. If you start from the smallest and you work your way up, so then no one is directly disagreeing with the greatest one. That's the case. And since this pasuk again is talking about din nefashos, so that's the halacha. Leisana al riv or leisana al rav means that by din nefashos arrange the situation in such a case, in such a way where no younger dayan is directly disagreeing and confronting the greater dayan. In other words, start from the youngest and you work your way to the oldest. So there's no direct disagreement. At the end of the day, there'll be disagreement. There's no direct disagreement. Let's lisan al rav. Don't disagree with the rav. In other words, arrange the situation, at least by din nefashos, in such a way that there's no clear, direct argument and conflict. So start from bottom up. By din nemaminus, where we don't have this halacha, then you go back to the regular way of thinking, which is always that we give the kavod to the oldest one to begin. So in other words, that's the way the Milky Yosef is simply reading the Gemara. We start off with the basic assumption, which is, well, if you have a bunch of dayanim and each one has to say their opinion, of course you start with the most respected. That's the way to think. When it comes to din nefashos, the pasuk says leisan al riv, and we tarch it leisan al rav, that we want to arrange it in such a way where there's no clear disagreement with the head honcho. So that's why we start from the bottom up. Why would the Torah be makbid by din nefashos? That we don't want to have a direct conflict, that you don't have to want to say, I disagree with you. Okay, so until now, gzer sakasa, just kacha. That's the way it is. By din nefashos, that's what the Torah wants. Okay.
Age or godless?
Not age necessarily, but godless in terms of, like in the Rambam, we have this in the Gemara that it tells us that even by Sanhedrin Agadol, I don't know if we find this by the lower Sanhedrins, but by the Sanhedrin Agadol, it was actually arranged, the seating was arranged based on stature. So it wasn't age necessarily, but in terms of, it was understood who were the Gedalim and who were the Ketanim. That's how it was. Now, so far that's what we have. Okay? Gzer Sakasav, by din nefashos, that it should start bottom up, and everything else, you go with the regular assumption, which is, the greatest one begins to talk first. Okay. Now, there's a Gemara in Gittin, Armaka number 3. There's a Gemara in Gittin, Daf Nun Ches and Aleph. Now, this is a concept I mentioned Shavuos night. You don't have to have been there, and you certainly don't have to have remembered anything I was talking about to chop this. But the Gemara says like this. What the Gemara is talking about, the general context is not for now. But the Gemara says the following thing. The Gemara is referring to a certain set of takanas that the Mishnah in Gittin over there mentions, that there was a certain list of takanas that the Tanoim came up with. Amar Rav, and Rav said, I was part of that Beis Din, the minyan of Rebbe, when Rebbe, Rabbeinu HaKadosh, had his enclave of Chachamim to organize Mishnayos. So along with organizing Mishnayos, he also made a lot of takanas and so on. And says Rav, I was part of that Beis Din. And Rav is saying, and I was the youngest, I was the smallest of that Beis Din. And whenever there was a need for figuring out, for counting heads and who holds what, I was the first one to speak. In other words, Rav is saying that there was a whole Beis Din of Rebbe, I was the youngest, and I was the first one to speak. So the Rishonim make a point, 1 second. We're not talking about when Rebbe was making his Beis Din, he wasn't dealing with the nefashos. He's talking about deciding what goes into Mishnayos, what doesn't go into Mishnayos, making certain takanas, not making certain takanas is not din nefashis. So why is Rav the first one to speak? If it was Rav was the youngest of that Beis Din, right? He's the greatest of the Amoraim, the oldest of the Amoraim, but the youngest of the Tanaim. So why in the world is Rav the first one to speak in Minyana de Rebbe? If by din nefashis we saw Loisan al Rav, that there's a halacha that we want to arrange a situation where there's no direct argument and direct you're not going directly against any one of the gedolim, and therefore we start from the bottom. But by anything else that's not din nefashis, there's no halacha of Loisan al Rav. So why in the world would by Minyana de Rebbe would they start from Rav? They should start from Rebbe. So that's the question the Rishonim ask. Says Tosfos, Marmukah number 4. So Tosfos in the Gemara Gittin asks this question, or indirectly, but deals with it. And Tosfos says like this: you're right. The reason why by the Beis Din of Rebbe they started with Rav was not because of a halacha of Leisan al Rav. That's something unique to Din Nefashis, and that was not the case by the Beis Din of Rebbe. So why they start from Rav? Mishum Anav. Rebbe, the Gemara says in sight that the Rebbe was an unbelievable anav. So as an expression of his humility, that's my gadol, that he shouldn't, be seen as the gadol. So this is how he arranged it, that you start from Rav. But it wasn't because of lisan al Riv, it was an act of humility. Okay, so in other words, Rebbe's, he didn't want to be the first one to speak, so this is the arrangement they made in order as an expression of humility. Okay, that's what the Gemara says. In other words, what comes out from all of this is that we have now two halachas. We have technically the halacha of Lisana al Rav, which means that by din nefashis, me'ikar hadin, the halacha is you have to start from the lowest in order to, again, avoid there being any direct, argument and conflict between a younger one and a greater one, so the younger one speaks first. So that's Lisana al Rav. So why did they have this in the Beis Din of Rebbe if that wasn't din nefashis? That's a new halacha, new introduction, that even though you're not dealing with din nefashis, as an expression of humility, it's definitely allowed, and if Rebbe did it, it's probably recommended as an expression of humility. Okay. Because of this, comes the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat, Marmukah number 5, the Shulchan Aruch in Choshen Mishpat, Siman Yud Ches, Seif Aleph, says the following halacha. Again, the Shulchan Aruch is talking about the procedural side of Beis Dins, and he's not talking about din nefashis capital cases. There's no capital cases in Shulchan Aruch. So ula'achar shekibla do some. So by case of monetary halachas, after testimony is made, v'yotziu kol adam l'chutz. So they tell everyone to leave the Beis Din, except for the dayanim. V'yisu v'yitnu b'davar, and they go back and forth. Haga, says the Ramah, yesh oimrim, and when it comes to expressing their opinion, there are those that say that it's good to start from the younger person. This is not talking about din nefashis. The answer is the Ramah is based on Tosfos. That besides Leisan al Rav, which is like a halacha that you have to start from the bottom by din nefashis, but you see by Rebbe's Beis Din that it's always a nice idea and a good recommendation. It's an expression of humility, and every Beis Din should try to aspire to be as humble as the Beis Din of Rebbe, and therefore it's recommended always to start from the youngest as an expression of humility. Din nefashis you would have to, but outside of din nefashis it's recommended as an expression of humility, just like we find by the Beis Din of Rebbe. That's what we find. Okay. The problem is the Rambam in Marmukah number 6, as it usually goes, and then there's in the memoirs of Rav Soloveitchik, so he used to write that when he was younger, when he was a kid, so by his father used to give shiur in his bedroom, because there was one bedroom. It was a one room. You know what I mean? So the Rav Soloveitchik used to describe how he was in bed, and he's playing in his bed. Meanwhile, his father's giving shiur to the Talmidim, and the Soloveitchik said he didn't understand what was going on, but all I heard was that the Rambam was always under attack. The Rambam was always being attacked, and my father always came to save the Rambam. That's and he said he used to run to his mother and say, the Rambam is in such trouble, and Daddy, he saved the day. He picked the Rambam. So the Rambam's always in trouble, but then he saves the day himself. Okay, so Marmukah number 6. The Rambam in Hilchos Sanhedrin, Perek Yud Aleph Halacha Vav, records this halacha that we saw from the first Mishnah, which is again, says the Rambam, Din Imaminis, monetary halachas, V'chein Atumas V'Taharis, or situations of Tum and Tahara, Maschila Min HaGadol Shabbat. You start with the greatest, again, by monetary halachas and so on. You start with the greatest, the Shaimanis Tavarav, and you listen to him, and then you move on to the next one. The Nefashis, when it comes to capital cases, then the opposite. Maschila Min HaTzad, we start from the bottom. We start from the youngest. The Ein Shem Divrei HaGadol El B'Achreinu. We only hear the words of the Gadol at the very end. So the Rambam basically pretty much quotes for us the Mishnah in Sanhedrin we started with. The problem is, the Achreinu point out, why doesn't the Rambam at least mention that for humility purposes, it is a nice thing and it is recommended to do starting from the bottom, even for Dinim Amanis. That's what Rebbe's Beis Din did. So why would the Rambam not mention this? The Ramah does mention it in the Shulchan Aruch because, listen, even the Beis Din of Rebbe was not Din Nefashis, so why did he start from the bottom? As an expression of humility. Okay, so you see that even not Din Nefashis, you might not have to, but at least you see by Rebbe that it's something that to aspire to. So why would the Rambam not even mention that? It might sound like not much of a question, but the Achronim, the Lachem Mishnah, they make this as a question. Why would the Rambam not? You just read the Rambam, you would come to the conclusion that by Din Nefashis you have to start from the bottom, and by Din Amanis you have to start from the top. That's not true. From the case of Rebbe, from the Beis Din of Rebbe, you see that by Din Nefashis you have to start from the bottom, and by Din Amanis also you could start from the bottom, and maybe it's recommended to start from the bottom as an expression of humility. So why would the Rambam not mention this? The Rambam makes it sound like it's so rigid that Din Nefashis is bottom, Din Amanis has to be on top. By Rebbe was Din Amanis, and it wasn't from the top. So evidently you're allowed to start from, in the very least, you're allowed to start from the bottom. If not more, if not even recommended.
That case is Din Amanis, or just basically say that Mishnah?
So that's what we're going to see about that, but it's definitely not Din Nefashis.
Right.
It's definitely not Din Nefashis. So, you see that even though Lisan al-Riv is not talking about Minyana de Rebbe, you can still start from the bottom. That's the question.
Wasn't it just an exception though?
Well, Tais just said it wasn't just an exception. It's showing us that first of all, even things that are not Din Nefashis, you can start from the bottom, and as an expression of anivus, it's actually a beautiful thing to do. It's an haga tova. It's a good minhag to do that. So why would the Rambam not mention this good minhag? Why not? Rebbe thought it was a good minhag, and it's not like the Gemara over there brings down other a disagreement. Okay, that's another question. Is like this in Marmukah number 7. There's a Yerushalmi. This is a little bit from left field, but the Yerushalmi in Rosh Hashanah, Parak Beis Halacha Hey. We know that when it comes to one of the big jobs of the Sanhedrin was to be in charge of the calendar, right? So when it comes to taking charge of the calendar, there are two basic things. You have Kiddush HaChodesh, sanctifying every month, and then in theory being Ma'aber the Shana, making a leap year. Those are the two big things to do. So those two things were under the auspices and jurisdiction of the Sanhedrin HaGadol. So, and you need a Beis Din to convene to do Kiddush HaChodesh and to figure out Ibra HaShana. So says the Yerushalmi like this. Tani brings down a brayso. So this is not quoted in Bavli, but it's quoted in Yerushalmi. Tani, the Kiddush HaChodesh, when Beis Din would convene to sanctify the new month, Maschil Min HaGadol. You start from the greatest. That's, again, it's not Dinin Nefashis. There's no Leisan al-Riv. So you start from the Gadol, because that's what you usually do. Amr Reb Chia that's the brayso. So far, so good. Amr Reb Chia Barada, Reb Chia Barada said, Masnisan Amr Kain, and we even have, this also seems like from the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah, because the Mishnah in Rosh Hashanah says, Rosh Beis Din Amr Mekudesh, that the head of the Beis Din is the one that says Mekudesh. So it sounds like even from the Mishnah, that when it comes to Kiddush HaChodesh, you start from the top. So far, so good. Tani, but then the brayso continues. Le'ibra Hashana, when it comes to a Beis Din convening to decide whether to make a leap year, Maschil Min Hatzad, you start from the bottom. That's what the brayso says. Now this is something that's quoted in Yerushalmi, and the Rambam pasuk is like this too. Marmukah number 8. The Rambam in Hilchos Kiddush HaChodesh, Perek Daled Halacha Yud Aleph, Ube'ibra Hashana, Maschil Min Hatzad. When it comes to a leap year, the Beis Din, as far as opinions are concerned, we start from the bottom. Ulakadish HaChodesh, and to sanctify the new month, Maschil Min HaGadol, you begin with the Gadol. So this is a Pella. What in the world? Why in the world would Ibra Hashana be different than anything else? Again, until now, the only source that we have to start from the bottom is either because of the pasuk of Leisan al Riv, which is talking about Din Nefashis, or a general a minhag taiva like the Beis Din of Rebbe, because of humility, to start from the bottom. But where in the world does this come from that all of a sudden Ibra Hashana has to start from the bottom too? The Yerushalmi doesn't bring him a car. The Rambam doesn't bring him a car. The Mefarshim on the Rambam just take you to the Yerushalmi. So it doesn't tell you anything. So what's going on over here? What's going on over here? Okay. So it's like this. Until now, let's go back to the very halacha that we started with. Leisan al Riv. That the Torah says, based on the interpretation of Chazal, that when it comes to a capital case, we want to start from the bottom, so you're not directly, conflicting with the gadol. Okay, so why is that? Like, what's the nature of that halacha? So things like this. If it's coming from like a sense of kavod, like we don't want. Listen, even the younger dayan has to say his opinion, but it's not nice for him to directly conflict with the opinion of the gadol. So then why by dafka din nefashos? I mean, it's if it's disrespectful, it's disrespectful. We all din Torah. So what's the inyan by din nefashos? So again, like I said, in the Gemara it's unclear. The Rishonim unclear. The Rambam himself, though, begins to explain a little bit where this is coming from, and when we understand better where this is coming from, we'll be able to hopefully answer the questions. Okay, so it's like this. Take a look at Maramuk number 9. This is the Rambam in Sefer Mitzvahs. Okay, so in Sefer Mitzvahs, Lois Asay Reish Pei Gimel, the Rambam is talking about this Lois Asay of Leisan al Riv Lentais. Okay, and like I said, the simple words without the drush of Chazal. What are the words? Don't respond to an argument to go one way, which is a pel. I mean, that's exactly what the job of Beis Din is. So what is the lav? What's the general lav? So it says like this: the Rambam Shehizer Adayin. The dayan is being warned. In other words, what he's not allowed to do. Mehatois ladas dayan acher al tzad hi yoshin elov v'chiyav hachayev oizikay hazakai mibilti shiadover muvan etzlai. Says the Rambam, this is the fundamental principle of the lav. The fundamental principle of the lav is that the Rebbeinu Shalom wants each dayan to have his own opinion. We want each dayan to have his own opinion and not to just go with someone else's opinion. At the end of the day, the Beis Din is going to need a majority rule, in order to go with something. So we want, says the Rambam, that's the point of this lav. We want each dayan to fundamentally have his own opinion and not to just sign off on something that another dayan said. Says the Rambam. So again, shehizir hadayan mihatois ladas dayan acher. Every judge is being warned and being prohibited from just tilting to the opinion of another dayan, just to go. He said that, fine. You know what? He's gonna take. I'll go with that too. Outside he yoshin just to rely on another opinion of a dayan, the chiyav chayev, whether it's to say chayev, izik izak, or whether to say zaki, whatever it is. But we don't want you just to go with someone else's opinion. We built ishiadover muvan etzle. We want it to be clear by you. We want you to really hold of what you're saying. Lefi hakeshai, based on your understanding, the sichloi, and your understanding, and so on. Mehakdamis haTorah, based on the introductions that you have to Torah. Your opinion should be your opinion. V'hu amrei, and that's the meaning of the pasuk. Leisan al riv. Don't respond to an argument to tilt one way. In other words, don't respond. The shayla is being presented to you. You're one of the dayanim. Don't respond to that shayla, to that argument, by just saying, okay, you know what? Reuven said that. I'll go with that way. Or Levi said that way. I'll go with that. Just. To go with that. We don't want that. Yerotze bezeh, says the Rambam, the meaning of the pasuk is like tevakish beriv hanati levad. As a response to a shayla, to an argument that's presented to Beis Din, don't just go, you know what, I'll go that way too. Don't do that. V'ushetita im haroiv, to just go with the majority, right? Or im hagedailim, or with the greatest ones. The tishtag mashiyish b'nafshecha b'denahu, and to be silent from what you truly internally feel. The Lashon Mechilta, and the Medrash brings out this point, Mechilta the Rashbi, Leisan al Riv Lentais, says the Medrash on this pasuk, Shloi Timer b'Shas Minyan, that when the opinions are being discussed and laid out, the person, one of the dayanim shouldn't say, Da yishek yish plani. No, okay, listen, it's not so bad if I go with that guy's opinion. He's pretty good, you know what I mean? So I'll go with him. El Amor Mashal Fanecha, you say your opinion. You say your opinion. So that's the fundamental halacha, and because of this, as we'll see in a second, this is why the Beis Din is set up, and the procedure is set up in such a way that we start from the katan, because we don't want the gadol to say something, and the katan to be swayed and to say, you know what, if he said that, you know what, he knows what he's talking about. I'll just go with that. You know what I mean? We don't want that. We want to force each dayan to really say his opinion, not just to go with the flow. And that's why we make this procedure in such a way where, listen, you're the first one to be asked is the youngest one. That's how we go, because we don't want there to be a situation where the dayan is tempted to just, sign off on someone else's opinion. But here's the chiddush. Says the Rambam, Yachal af din imamis kain. This is all by din nefashos. When it comes to monetary halachas, it's not like this. When it comes to din imamis, We don't have this procedural halacha. We start with the gadol. Why? Says the Rambam, this isn't just a matter of procedure. This is telling us something fundamental about the dinei mamanis versus dinei nefashis. Dinei nefashis, we demand each dayan to have their own opinion. By dinei mamanis, we don't demand each dayan to have their own opinion. We don't mind if you just go with someone else. So therefore, this is not just a matter of procedure. This is a fundamental point, that there are two different types of dinim. There are some dinim which demand each person's personal opinion. And whenever you're dealing with such a din Torah, then automatically we are going to arrange the setup in such a way to facilitate that. So by din nefashis, we want each dayan to have their own opinion. And so in order to facilitate that, we'll start from the bottom up. So no one should be intimidated, or no one should just, hear someone greater than them and say, you know what, I'm not gonna start. But by dinei mamanis, we don't mind if it's like that.
Why? Why is that okay?
So what's that? We don't mind if it's like that because of that, and therefore, by dinei mamanis, start with the gadol. If the gadol says something, the katan might be intimidated and might be swayed. Zundait, nishkefelach. That's what the Rambam is saying. So again, that's what he keeps on saying, that by dinei nefashis, we want to make sure each dayan says his own opinion. Yachal af dinei mamanis kain. Maybe you would say that by dinei mamanis too. It's not true. It's not true. When it comes to dinei mamanis, go to the majority, it's nishkefelach. And because of this, that's why by dinei nefashis you go from the bottom, and by dinei mamanis you go from the top. Now this is a pella. This is a pella. To say that by dinei mamanis, a dayan is allowed to say, you know what, I really disagree with the idea. It's not really something you know what, I'm not going to start. Fine. Guilty. Or honestly, you can't. Such a thing, it's a pella. So this before the Rambam, this was all just procedural, gzeras hakassos, whatever. But once the Rambam tells us that this question of procedural setup, of who speaks first, is not just a matter of procedure. And it's not just a matter of like giving respect or not giving. This is telling on a fundamental aspect of this type of din Torah, that this type of din Torah we demand and require each dayan to say their opinion, and because of that we facilitate that by starting from the bottom. So you tell me you don't need that by dinei mamanis. You don't need that by dinei mamanis. By dinei mamanis you don't have to. By dinei mamanis you have a majority rule, and three. And most of the yonim erring on the one side is really just they don't really believe it. They're just like, okay, I'll go with that because why not? It's just we'll get the case out of the way, whatever it is. I don't want to deal with the headache of having to deal with the gadol shabbat dayanim, and that's okay. Such a thing. Again, without the Rambam, of course you can't do that by dinei mamanis. So what was and before the Rambam? Of course you couldn't do that by dinei mamanis either. Every case you have to say your opinion for whatever reason, because you're a sakasiv. Procedurally, the Torah said by these cases start from the top, these cases start from the bottom. But it wasn't about trying to give space, for each dayan to express their opinion. But once the Rambam says that this is a procedural halacha that's rooted in really giving space for each dayan to say their opinion, and we only care about that by dinei nefashis, we don't care about that by dinei mamanis. How's that possible? So so what's the aside? So the concept is like this. There was a mimer from Lubavitcher Rebbe. He wasn't talking about this particular shaila, but he made the following point, and it's a very good point. It's as follows: you could have the situation I painted just now is very extreme. You have a case of where the dayan really feels one way, but he's, you know what, it's a headache, I'm just going to go the other way, fine. Who holds chayiv? Really, I hold pater, but you know what, chayiv. That for sure you can't do. For sure you can't do. That's called sheker. That's mamish. You can't do that. But here's the nakuda. Lubavitcher pointed out that very often when you have an adam gadol say an opinion, it's not that, listen, if you personally mamish disagree, you could disagree. But once an adam gadol says an opinion, then already it clouds and it colors your perspective. And then when you investigate the sugya, you're colored by the fact that this gadol goes one way, and the marmakaimis that, so for example, the big dayan is asked the question, what do you hold? So he says, listen, there's a shach, there's a taz, and there's a bir hagrovi here, and there's a tesefta somewhere else, and all of that, my conclusion is pater. So the other dayan is thinking, oh, those are pretty good marmakaimis. So he's also going to use those marmakaimis, and he'll also investigate those marmakaimis. And you know what his conclusion is going to be also? Butter. He means it. But is that really an essential shot? That was that his Torah? Wasn't his Torah. He was just following the path that's been laid out by the Gadol. So what? It's not the shot that it was shaker. It wasn't shaker. But it wasn't necessarily his pneumistic opinion. He was following a path that was laid out by the Gadol. Huh? He's biased by it. And that's the path that he's going with. So here's the Nakuda. This is the Chiddush of the Rambam. That of course every single Din Torah, every Dayan has to say what they feel is correct, 100%. But says the Rambam, but there are certain Din Torah that you have to say your opinion without any bias, without any preconceived assumptions or notions or tiltings from anyone else. It has to be purely from within yourself. And there are some Din Torah that don't require that. It's okay to go with the marmakaimis that the Gadol gives, and to, as long as it resonates with you, after going through the sugya, after being presented by the Adam Gadol, but you go through you yourself, and then it resonates, that's fine. And this is the side of what the Rambam is telling us. When it comes to, of course, Din Nefashis and Din Nefashis and Din Mominus, you have to say your honest opinion. If you mamish feel it's wrong, you can't be silent. But by Din Nefashis, you can't have any bias as well. All the marmakaimis you have to come up with your own marmakaimis. You can't. The psak halacha that you're coming up with by Din Nefashis can't just be painted or colored or within a context presented already by an earlier dayan. Not so by Din Mominus. Din Mominus is not. It's not like that. You have to say your opinion, but your opinion could also be sort of part of that larger context that the greater dayan already presented. And this is why. So by Din Nefashis, we start from the bottom, because we don't want any of the younger dayanim for their sugyas to be colored or painted by anyone greater than them. You come with your own marmakaimis. By Din Mominus, we don't mind that. Of course, even by Din Mominus, if the Gadol says something that the younger dayan mamish disagrees with, he has to step up. But assuming that he will, because if you're a dayan, we assume that you're going to be honest, at least as that. But we don't mind if the sugya that you're coming from, is coming from the similar perspective that was presented by the Adam Gadol. Let's take a look at Marmuk. Yeah.
This follows the whole idea because we're looking for every source possible by Din Nefashis.
So that would be one way to think of it, 100%. By Din Nefashis, the reason why by Din Nefashis we want this is because we want to find every avenue of schos. 100%. Take a look at So that is true. It could work out the other way. But presumably, with enough opinions and enough space for each opinion, we'll find some reason for schos. And the halach is, when it comes to the nefashis, once a tzad schos is presented, then all the diyanim have to rethink it. They all have to rethink it. By Din Mominus, we're not so makbid like that. Making a schos for one guy is making a chiyah for the other guy. You know what I'm saying? There's no clear cut, winner or loser. They're both, one guy's winner, one guy's a loser. You know what I'm saying? So by Din Mominus, by Din Nefashis, it's not like that. So once.
And if there's a unanimous decision, we presuppose automatically a bias.
Exactly. So by Din Nefashis, we already tilted towards that way anyway. Yeah.
Din Mominus has a lack of finality to it. It's just money.
That's another for also. Yeah. It could also be undone. It could be paid back. If you find out it's a mistake. Din Nefashis is already is done deal. It's done deal. Take a look at Marmuk number 10. See how the chinuch, again, the chinuch is also going with the Rambam. Listen to how he says, Mishar she'em mitzvah zu. The root of this mitzvah, again, of the procedural halacha, the Din Nefashis, you start from the bottom, Din Mominus, you start from the top, is Kamaisha Amanu Tchila. It's a little printing mistake. Printing, this is my typo. Kamaisha Amanu Tchila. It's like what I said earlier. Sh'lo echad min hadayanim acher chavei, right? Like we said, like the Rambam said, that by Din Nefashis, we don't want one dayan to follow the path of an earlier dayan. El Yavna Devar Me'atz, he wanted to come to it on his own. Hatam, and why are we so makbid about this when it comes to Din Nefashis? So it's like Rabbi Kagan says, because if we don't do this, then it could very well be that the entire Din Torah, by a capital punishment, might ultimately be decided by the presentation of one dayan. Right? The one guy, the first one that says the sugya, so everyone else is coming from that. So it means it boils down that it could be that this guy's life is being decided by really one person. So yes, ultimately all the Dayanim have to say their opinion, but it's colored by the marmakaimis of the first one. and we don't want that to happen. We don't want a Jewish soul to be given over to one person's opinion. Al within moment, when it comes to monetary cases, shnitin li shavin, like Isaac said, the money can be given back. So it's not so final. We're not so makpid if all the opinions are colored and painted by one. It's nicht gefällig. Okay, what comes out from this is that based on this, we now have two different, again, as you said before, two different types of Dinei Torah. You have some Dinei Torah which demand the independent opinion of each dayan, and you have some Dinei Torah which don't fundamentally demand the independent opinion of each dayan. You need a majority rule. They have to paskin, and they have to be honest, but you don't need the fundamental. It doesn't have to be the apsak, a halacha that's coming from the personal nefesh and the independent kishkas of that dayan. So which din is like this, and which din is like that. So until now we have din nefashis is a case of where you need the opinion of each independent dayan. Din Mamonis is not like that. Why does din nefashis need that? So the Chinuch told us, because you don't want one person's life ultimately to depend on one dayan. You want, in order to find more possibilities of schus, so you want each dayan to present their opinion. Let's say though, I could find other types of Dinei Torah where also, maybe for other reasons, we want each dayan to have an independent opinion. Then of course the halacha would also be that you start from the bottom. In other words, what we're seeing over here is that the halacha of starting from the bottom is not specific to Dinei Nefashis per se. It's any type of Din Torah where you fundamentally require the independent thought process of each dayan, that automatically, in order to facilitate that, you have to start from the bottom. Dinei Nefashis, you need that. Why does Dinei Nefashis need that? Because you want to have a lot of possibilities of this guy's life being saved. But let's say I could find other Dinei Torah for other reasons. We also have a reason to have an independent opinion for each dayan. Then also the halach would be to start from the bottom up. The Yerushalmi said that by Ibr Hashana, to calculate a leap year, we start from the bottom. Here's why it's not Dinei Nefashis. The answer is, take a look at Maramok number 11. The Rambam in Hilchas Kiddush HaChodesh Perek Dad Halacha Tes says a unique halacha when it comes to the Beis Din of a leap year case that's different than in Kol Torah Kula. Says the Rambam, Ein ma'abrinis hashana. We only make a Beis Din about a leap year. Ela b'mezumanim la. The people on the Beis Din, the dayanim on the Beis Din to figure out, to calculate a leap year, they have to be prepared. They have to be mizum. They have to be invited for it. It can't just be, the Beis Din's here anyway. It's just one of the cases that are coming along the way. No. There has to be a specific designation that each dayan is designated from beforehand. You are going to be on the Beis Din to figure out the leap year. Says the Rambam, Keitzad, what do I mean? It means Yomer Rosh Beis Din Hagadol, L'ploini Uploini Min HaSanhedrin. That the head of the Beis Din, head of the Sanhedrin, has to specifically go to each individual member that he's going to pick for this Din Torah. Hayu Mizimonim L'makim Ploini. You are hereby invited to come to this particular location. That we'll sit down and we'll calculate and we'll figure out. We don't find this anywhere else. There's no such halacha anywhere else that in order for a particular din Torah to be presented to a Beis Din, they have to be given advance warning and specific invitation to each one. Come to this in this place, in this time, we're going to have the din Torah about this. Where's the makar of such a thing? The Beidavki Ibra Hashana. So Maramaka number 12, there's a Gemara in Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Sanhedrin, Daf Yud Aleph Amid Aleph, Maisa Rabbi Gamliel. The Maisa goes with Rabbi Gamliel. Sha'amar, that Rabbi Gamliel said to a number of Chachamim, Hishkimuli Shiva Laliyah, and he sort of invited specifically 7 members of the Sanhedrin to come to the attic, this particular place, to deal with an Ibra Hashana, to deal with a leap year. Hishkim, so he gets up there the next morning, and what's a shemayin? There's 8 people there. He only invited 7. Amar, so he said, Mihu Shialabu Shlei Bereshus, who came up without permission, not being invited. Yered, he has to go down. You're not allowed to be here unless you're invited. Amar Shmuel HaKadan, V'amar, so Shmuel HaKadan was, he gets up there and he stands up and he says, Anihu Shalisi Shlei Bereshus, it was me, I'm sorry, I came up without being invited. V'loila Abra Hashan Elisi, you should know, I didn't come to be part of the Beis Din to make a leap year. I just wanted to watch. I just wanted to watch it. Amar Loi, so Gamliel says, okay, shev b'ni shev. It's okay, you can sit. Ru'uyas kol hashanim kum l'sabra yidachin. You should know, Shmuel HaKadmi says, you're worthy. You know enough, you could paskin that really bets him you're worthy of being on the Beis Din to make a leap year. Ella amru chacham, you should know, just that's the halacha. Ein ma'av hashana el mezamanim. The only ones that could be allowed on a Beis Din to make a leap year are specific dayanim that have been invited from beforehand. This is coming from. The answer is, Me'izatam Shia, this was the Kabbalah Chazal, that there's something about a Beis Din of leap year that also every dayan has to be his own little bubble, his own little universe. And every dayan's opinion by Ibra Hashana also has to be his independent opinion. He's not just part of this bigger picture of other dayanim. You, by yourself, you have your space. You have your space. And this is not just a halach about inviting them. This is a window into the concept of making a leap year. That the Beis Din of making a leap year is functioning similarly to Din Nefashis, in which that every dayan fundamentally is required to say his independent opinion and not to be colored by anyone else or by any bigger picture. You yourself are in a little universe, you're in a little bubble. That's how you are being invited to Beis Din, and that's how you have to function as part of Beis Din. Not looking at anyone else, not thinking about anyone else. You're not just here, you're here because you were invited as an individual, you by yourself. Say your opinion. Therefore, in other words, what the Rambam saw in this is that Ibra Hashana is also a type of Din Torah which falls into that category, that we need each dayan to say his opinion without being clouded by anyone else. And therefore, says the Yerushalmi, and the Rambam Haskins like this, therefore, of course, you start from the bottom up by Ibra Hashana too. It's not Din Nefashis. It's not Din Nefashis, but the same reason why Din Nefashis you start from the bottom up, because we want to create an environment that every dayan is able to say his opinion without being clouded or colored or biased by anyone else. By Din Nefashis, we want that to possibly save this guy's life. But by Ibra Hashana, we want it because that's the halacha l'maish we've seen it, that Chazal received when it comes to Ibra Hashana. But in either case, it boils down to the same thing, that each person has his own opinion without it being colored or anything by anyone else. And whenever you have a Din Torah like that, you always start from the bottom. So therefore, Ibra Hashana also is like that. What about Minyana de Rebbe? So now, with this principle from the Rambam, the case of the Beis Din of Rebbe is also Pasha. Why was Beis Din of Rebbe, why did they start from Rav? Why did they start from the bottom? So Taisa said, it's not Din Nefashis, why would they start from the bottom? Okay, it must be, it's just them. It's a nice minhag to do that for humility. So why would the Rambam not ever mention that? The answer is, that's not why they started from the bottom, by the minyan of Rebbe. What was the Beis Din of Rebbe trying to do? The Beis Din of Rebbe was trying to gather together all of Torah Sheba'al Peh into one cohesive unit called Mishnayos. What's interesting is that, everyone knows the Rambam in his introduction to Mishnah Torah goes through the Messiah, right? Moshe killed her Sinai, gives it to Yeshua, and the Mishnah, and then in Perek Yavos just says the Canaan, Nevi'im. The Rambam spells out, mamish, each person until Ravina Ravash, until the end of the Gemara. It's interesting. You don't have it in front of you, but you take a look, you'll see it's interesting. Every single person in that chain of Messiah, after Moshe and Yeshua, they're never, by the Rambam, they're never mentioned by just them. It's always this person, Beis Dinai. The only two people that are mentioned just them is Moshe and Yeshua. After that, it's Eli Beis Dinai. It's Shmuel Haramasi Beis Dinai. David Beis Dinai. Ravina and Beis Dinai. Rabbeinu HaKadosh Beis Dinai. Rabbi Kiva Beis Dinai. It's all, why is that? Is because fundamentally, Torah is not under any one person's control. Moshe Rabbeinu is different, Yeshua ben Nun is different. That's the son of the moon, that's different Indian. Chazal saying the Gemara in Nedarim that if it wasn't for the sins of the Jewish people, all we would need is Chumash and Sefer Yeshua, we're good to go. So there is something special about Moshe and Yeshua. But after Yeshua ben Nun, fundamentally, Torah Sheba'al Peh, every single Jew has an individual, personal chelik in Torah. And it's not, and by its very definition, it's not under the jurisdiction and the control and the bias of one person. It's headed by one person, so it's David HaMelech Beis Dinai. It's Shmuel Hanavi Beis Dinai. It's, like I said, Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol Beis Dinai. But it's not just Rabbi Shmuel Kohen Gadol. Therefore, what's Rabbeinu HaKadosh doing with arguing with Mishnayos? He's trying to make one cohesive system of Mishnayos that gathers together, that is reflective of all of Torah Sheba'al Peh. In order to do that, by its very definition, the Mishnayos that he's making also have to express this Nakuda, that he is not the only one in charge. Because that's what Torah Sheba'al Peh is. Torah Sheba'al Peh, the nature of Torah Sheba'al Peh is that there is no one person in charge of it. Not even one person that's able to make the path, and everyone just follows like that. The Torah Sheba'al Peh, every single Jew has their independent chelik in Torah, independent of the Gadol Hadar. The Gadol Hadar is the Gadol Hadar. But his godless doesn't mean that everyone else is just a part of his Torah. Everyone has their Torah. And therefore, just as by Din Nefashis, the Din Nefashis require that every single Dayan should express his own personal opinion without any color from anyone else. Why? Because we want to give as much possibility to save a life as possible. And Ibra Hashana, also every Dayan has to say his personal opinion without being colored by anyone else. Why? Because that's the Messiah that's the Alach Mishpasina that Chazal had by Ibra Hashana. That's exactly what, so too, in that Beis Din that Rebbe is convening to establish and to concretize Torah Sheba'al Peh, also it has to be in such a way that every Tana in that Beis Din feels comfortable to say his personal Torah. Because only when each Tana is comfortable to say their personal Torah, only that is Torah Sheba'al Peh. Otherwise, that's just one person's Torah Sheba'al Peh. That's not Klal Yisrael's Torah Sheba'al Peh. Again, if it's Moshe and Yeshua, it's only one person that has Torah Sheba'al Peh, and everyone else is learning his Torah. But after Yeshua ben Nun, it's Eli uBeis Din. It's David uBeis Din. There is no one person that has all the Bailas. So if Beis Din of Rebbe was made in such a way that the Gadol said his opinion, and that colored everyone else, then by its very definition, that would be the undoing of Beis Din of Rebbe. The whole Beis Din of Rebbe is trying to establish a full picture of Torah Sheba'al Peh, which demands every person saying their particular chelik. So therefore, also, the Beis Din of Rebbe started from the bottom. Not because of some new halacha that it's nice to be humble. No, because in that function of that Beis Din, of course, it's required that it starts from the bottom. Now, the Rambam doesn't have to quote that because that was a one-time deal. It's not going to, that doesn't happen every year for all the Chum to get together to make Mishnayos. But in that context, it fits very well with the. In other words, Rebbe started from the bottom, Me'ikar Din. It wasn't because of Anivas. That's the way it has to be. Because Hayotze Ulanum Midvarenu is a very big aside, which is that every single Jew has a chelik in Torah, not completely independent of everyone else. Now,
you say that's why that it says Yeshua, Moshe, Yeshua, and then jumps right to
exactly. That's where the Rambam is probably coming from. And that you take a look. It's an amazing thing. Is every single one. This person uBeis Dinai. He does not, after Moshe and Yeshua, never stipulate this one person. It's never like that. And it's for a reason. Because after Moshe and Yeshua, Torah itself is fundamentally spread out amongst all the Chachamim. You have a leader, you have one person that's ultimately deciding. Rebbe was in charge of the Beis Din, I get it. But the opinions that were being established and being put in Torah Sheba'al Peh based on that Beis Din fundamentally had to be the opinions of each person by themselves. Now, just for mamish a few minutes to move into Pnimius. So Taka, what's the Tzad HaShava? What's Taka the inyan of Din Nefashis, Ibra Hashana, and Minyana de Rebbe? What's the Pnimius of it? So when the pasuk says regarding the coming of Mashiach, the pasuk says L'yilmadu ishes chaverai, that rather kulam yeduais. It says in pasuk regarding the coming of Mashiach that every single Jew will be their own navi, and the Rabbanu Shloim will be revealed in such a way that there's a bond between the Rabbanu Shloim and every single Yid independently. It means this entire construct that we're familiar with now, which is, a hierarchy between, someone that has information, someone that doesn't, that's a golistic inyan. When Mashiach comes, every single person is going to have their personal skashas. You'll still need to learn from other people. Everyone can be mashpi on each other, but there'll be a deep sense of personal attachment between you and the Rebbeinu Shalom, independent of anything else, independent of wherever you're coming from. So there are certain din and there are certain situations that are tapping into that original Mashiach. Ibra Hashana, for example, what's the purpose of making a leap year? The purpose of leap year is to somehow bring together the lunar year and the solar year, right? Because we know the solar year is ahead of the lunar year and it causes problems ultimately. It's to bring together the sun and the moon. The sun and the moon coming together, that's Gula, that's Mashiach. That's the pasuk that describes Mashiach, is that the moon will be illuminated as the sun. Ibra Hashana, that Beis Din to sanctify the new moon, is reflective of Yemais Mashiach. Because Yemais Mashiach is a time of Lo Yilmadu Ishas Re'ehu, that no one person is going to have the authority or that connection to Rabban Shalom, and then giving connection to everyone is going to have their own personal connection to Rabban Shalom. So a Beis Din of Ibra Hashana is reflective of that, and therefore every dayan of that Beis Din also has to sort of feel that independent sense of place. And so too it is with Minyan de Rebbe, the forming of Mishnayos. Chazal say, Ein hagolius niskabseis el b'schus Mishnayos. That when Rabbeinu HaKadosh was establishing Mishnayos, wasn't just that itself is Gula. Chazal say that Mashiach comes in the merit of Mishnayos. Mishnayos means that's what we're talking about Shavuos night. That Mishnayos is concretizing Torah Sheba'al Peh, it's establishing the truth in the world in a very, very strong way. That's Gula. The Gula of Torah is Mishnayos to a certain degree. That instead of it being spread out and ultimately, God forbid, leading to disarray and to forgetfulness, Mishnayos means Kilois Shakach B'Pizara. That's what Mishnayos is. That's Gula. So of course, in the Cheshbon of Mishnayos has to be like that. And Din Nefashos is the same thing. Din Nefashos is a type of Din Torah which is an expression of, it's trying to, why is it that by Din Nefashos we try to go L'tzad Schos? Truth is the truth. If the guy's guilty, the guy's guilty. It's because Din Nefashos is a type of Din Torah which is trying to find the chashivas of the soul. It's trying to find the chashivas of the Jew. That's what Din Nefashos is. It's trying to investigate. Like those dinim, it's like looking for the schos. It's looking for the reason to say that this neshama is worthwhile saving. The whole inyan of Din Nefashos is gula. It's the opposite. The whole inyan of gula is that it's worth saving Yidden. You know what I mean? That's what gula is, to save. Like the pasuk says that the whole inyan of kibbutz goyis, of gathering the exiles, means that the Rebbeinu Shem is saying you're worth saving. You're worth saving. That's what Din Nefashos is about. All those types of Din Torah are reflective of a Geuladic mindset, which is every single person having their own independent space, an independent connection, an independent voice to give over their Torah. So that's the side of your Lisan al-Rav means it's a Gilui that every single person has their Chelek, their Torah, and that's what's going to be revealed in its full sense with the coming of Mashiach, the Meheira, the Meinu, Amen.